Every great journey, it seems, starts with this brilliant, clear vision. You have that spark, that calling, a sense of purpose that just feels undeniable. But then, reality hits.
It always does.
Shifting markets, new technology, cultural tides, unforeseen crises, all this weight of relentless change just starts to press in. And suddenly that sharp image you started with, it starts to blur.
And that moment is the key.
That moment, exactly. That's the core challenge so many of you have shared with us. And the method you started with is so clearly failing. But the purpose, you still hold that dear.
Right.
But here's the paradox that great leaders seem to discover, and what our sources just confirm over and over again. Change doesn't destroy the vision.
No, it refines it.
It refines it. It acts like a crucible. So our mission for this deep dive is to unpack exactly how to sustain that original purpose rather than, just preserving the initial strategy. It demands discernment, humility, and maybe most of all, the courage to just radically evolve the how.
And that distinction you just made between sustaining and preserving, that is absolutely critical to grasp right from the start.
Okay.
A vision isn't meant to be preserved, like some museum piece. It's meant to be sustained. It's an active thing, like a directed flame that needs constant tending and fuel adjustments.
I like that analogy.
The danger is really in two common leadership extremes. On one side, you have leaders who confuse steadfastness with just plain old stubbornness.
Right. They cling to yesterday's methods.
They cling to everything, maybe even the specific language of their first plan, and they just hope for a different result. They basically idolize the blueprint.
And the other side.
The other side is swinging to the opposite extreme. They abandon the original calling altogether at the first sign of real resistance.
So they mistake a necessary adaptation for, like, a fundamental failure.
Exactly. They jettison the whole purpose along with the method. So the process we're talking about today is how you sustain that clarity right in the middle of all the chaos without losing the authentic, unchanging core that started everything.
So, okay, let's unpack the anatomy of that vision then. Not the strategy, but the vision in its purest form. What are the two critical components every enduring vision has?
We have to separate two concepts. We call them the unchanging core and the flexible form. And this is really the foundation of adaptive leadership.
The core and the form.
The unchanging core, that's the divine essence. It's the ultimate purpose, the foundational what and why.
The destiny.
It's the destination, the ultimate impact you're meant to have. In a ministry context, for instance, the core might be something like making disciples who glorify God. That destination doesn't change. The flexible form is, it's everything else.
Everything else.
The methods, the strategies, the immediate objectives, all the specific pathways. It's the how and the when, the packaging, the platform, the programs.
Okay, so give me an analogy to make that stick.
Think of a historical journey like trying to get to the ancient city of Jerusalem. The core is the destination, Jerusalem. That's fixed.
Got it.
The form is how you get there. Do you travel by camel, by donkey, on foot? Which route do you take? Through the desert, along the coast. If bandits block the coastal road, you don't abandon the idea of getting to Jerusalem.
No, you find another way.
You change the form, you change the route.
That's really helpful. So if I'm hearing you right, the rigidity isn't in the belief, the core, but it's in the delivery mechanism.
The form, exactly.
How does this core and form distinction look outside of a ministry context, maybe, in the business world?
That's an excellent question because this principle is universal. For a successful tech startup, the core is almost never achieve a certain profit margin.
Okay.
The core is solving a fundamental human problem, removing some major friction for the consumer. It's about the lasting impact they promise.
And the form.
The form might be the specific app they launched with, or their pricing model, or even their initial target demographic. So when, say, AI fundamentally changes how people interact with technology.
They can't just cling to their old app architecture.
They can't. That's just the form. They have to adapt it, and fast, to keep sustaining that core purpose of solving the problem.
I see that happen all the time. An organization clings to the annual strategy that worked last year because, that's how we've always done it. Even when all the data shows that channel is stagnating. The initial blueprint has become the idol.
Precisely. And what our sources constantly remind us is that the initial blueprint, that first strategy you write down, it's just the first iteration of the how. It's inherently disposable.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me. This isn't just theory. Our sources point to these transformative biblical leaders who mastered this balance under, extreme life-threatening pressure.
Moses, Joseph, Paul.
Right. People like that. They didn't just survive. They actually leveraged the chaos. What was the central principle that let them translate that enduring core into these radical new forms?
So I think the central principle was servanthood over self-preservation. They recognized that their personal comfort or their initial plan was completely secondary to the divine purpose, and that forced them to be ruthless about examining their own methods.
So let's take Moses.
Okay, Moses, his core was clear: liberation and the promised land. But think about the form adaptation he had to go through. He started as the sole executor, going head-to-head with Pharaoh.
The hero?
The hero, right. But after the Exodus, trying to manage the chaos of, 1 million+ people in the wilderness, that original form of solo leadership was completely unsustainable.
It was breaking him.
It was. So he had to transition from warrior to chief visionary and teacher. And crucially, when his father-in-law Jethro gave him that counsel to delegate, he listened. He implemented a complete structural shift.
The leaders of thousands, hundreds, tens.
Exactly. And that wasn't just about reducing his workload. It was about scaling the vision so that the whole community could maintain covenant obedience. That change in form was a massive act of humility.
And Joseph, his path was just a staggering example of losing the form completely.
It was a labyrinth of betrayal, really. His core was leadership, honor, and the preservation of his family, the lineage of God's promise.
Love the form.
The form adaptation involved these radical, successive role shifts. Favored son, to humble slave, to a prisoner, and then finally, to the prime minister of Egypt.
His initial dream, his blueprint, was completely betrayed.
Utterly. By his own brothers. Yet it was the adversity, the diligence he showed in Potiphar's house and in that prison that forged the character he needed for the statesman role. The core vision demanded political power, but the path to get there was the complete inverse of what he expected.
That's an incredible transformation. It sort of implies that sometimes the path to the core requires us to completely abandon the initial form.
And trust the journey through the adversity.
He had to see divine intention inside human betrayal.
Exactly. And his declaration to his brothers, it just encapsulates this perfectly. He says, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, for the saving of many lives." He could separate his own trauma from the enduring purpose.
And what about Paul? The ultimate innovator, operating in this world of constant cultural shifts.
Paul's core was simple: carry the gospel to the Gentiles. His form adaptation was just pure, radical adaptability.
In what way?
In methodology and geography. For instance, when resistance in the synagogue got too great, he just changed his venue. He moved his whole base of operations to the lecture hall of Tyrannus.
How simple is that?
But the most famous shift was in Athens. Instead of his standard form-quoting Jewish scripture, he adapted his entire communication strategy. He engaged with the philosophers at the Areopagus using their cultural touchpoints.
The unknown God.
He used their altar to the unknown God as a bridge to the gospel. It was fascinating.
So he wasn't just changing locations, he was fundamentally changing his rhetoric. He abandoned scripture as the entry point and used philosophy instead. That feels like a massive, risky shift.
It was a monumental shift in form. He was flexible on how he communicated the truth, but he was fiercely unyielding on the message itself, the death and resurrection of Christ. He modeled situational wisdom applied to an unchangeable purpose.
So, okay, what does this all mean for us today? We need a practical framework for this because, as the sources note, the effective leader is more like a navigator than a map maker.
That's a great way to put it.
You're constantly responding to shifting currents. So let's categorize these sources of change and then introduce that adaptive framework.
Okay, that's the first step of wisdom. Identify the source of the pressure. We can categorize change into 3 main drivers.
Okay.
First, you have external forces. These are the uncontrollable tides. Technological advancements like AI, huge cultural shifts, recessions, or, a global pandemic forcing everyone online.
Things you react to.
Right. They demand agility. Second, you have internal drivers. These are the calls for change from within your own organization.
Like what?
Rapid growth or decline, leadership transitions, or just your own understanding of the vision maturing. These require you to have the courage to admit the current form isn't working anymore.
And the third?
The third is divine intervention. Those moments when God redirects you, maybe through a prophetic word or, more commonly, through closed doors and opened windows.
Like Paul's vision of the man from Macedonia.
Exactly. The Spirit literally prevented him from going to Asia and redirected him toward Europe.
That third one raises a really tough question, though. How do we practically discern if a door is closed by God, an intervention, or if it's just closed because of our own lack of effort or poor planning. That line can feel incredibly blurry on the ground.
It is blurry. And wisdom means you have to integrate both spiritual conviction and objective data. If a door stays closed despite your best strategic, spirit-led effort over time, and at the same moment a totally new, unexpected door opens, that's a pretty strong indication. Versus a door closing because of, say, volunteer burnout, that's not a divine pivot of the core. That's an internal driver telling you to change your structure.
That's a really essential distinction. So once we've discerned the source of the pressure, how do we respond systematically?
We need a vision adaptation framework. It's a clear, repeatable process used by what we call the catalyst leader. This is a 4D model.
Okay, what are the 4Ds?
Phase 1 is discern. This means really understanding the need for change. You listen to the spirit, yes, but you also scan the horizon. You gather objective data.
Not just feelings.
Not just feelings. You look at metrics like burnout rates or stagnating outreach numbers. You need clear signals that the existing form is failing the core.
Okay, discern. What's next?
Phase 2, design. Once you have that clarity, you craft the adaptive solution. This is where you brainstorm adaptations of the flexible form, always prioritizing the impact on the unchanging core. You have to ask, if we redesign this, does it accelerate or dilute our ultimate purpose?
And phase 3?
Phase 3 is deploy. You implement the change, this is the rollout. And the most critical part here is communicating the why just as much as the what and the how.
Leading with empathy.
With empathy, acknowledging the emotional cost of change, but constantly connecting that new form back to the sustained core purpose. If people don't get why the old way had to die, they will never commit to the new way.
And the last D.
Phase 4, develop. This means you learn, you refine, you sustain, you monitor progress, you gather feedback on the new form, and you iterate. You have to treat the new plan itself as a dynamic guide, always vigilant that the new form doesn't become the next idol.
That's a really actionable process. It brings us right back to where we started. Sustaining a vision is. It's about continuous, humble transformation, not just survival. It's about the discipline to discern what has to remain unchanged, that core purpose,
Right.
and what must evolve.
The method.
The ever-changing method.
And that journey, it requires what our sources call courageous leadership, the will to act, even when the path is uncertain. And that's a courage that's rooted not in your own skill, but in this unshakable trust in God's faithfulness to sustain the core.
Even when the form is burning to the ground.
And if we connect this back to the bigger picture of stewardship and legacy, it raises one final important question for you, for the listener.
Okay.
If you were to compare your current metrics of success, things like growth, efficiency, financial reach, with what our sources would call eternal metrics.
Like transformation or obedience.
Right. Transformation, discipleship depth, obedience under uncertainty. If you compare those two, what structural elements in your leadership would need to shift to align more perfectly with that eternal vision?
That's a challenging thought.
Because oftentimes the greatest act of faith we can perform isn't doubling down on a flawed strategy. It's not rigidly preserving the past. It's having the humility and the courage to just let go of the way things used to work, to allow a more mature, spirit-led vision to emerge through that inevitable crucible of change.